The name is Bootsy, baby, and you're on the tightrope. Let's walk, Bobby.
We are witnessing America as a failed social experiment.
How do we tell this story in a way that builds the kind of emotional momentum that colorblind ideology built?
So many young brothers and sisters of the younger generation find themselves so far removed from the best of their past.
What are we going to make out of the nothing we've been given? How do you envision possibility?
My dear sister Tricia, not too many shows can start with an artistic genius and funk master, Bootsy Collins. Woo, I'm telling you, he's something else.
Yeah, you ain't lying, Cornel. Bootsy definitely started off really strong. He killed that show promo for us. I don't know if anybody's got it like Bootzilla. But in addition to Bootsy, we had some very real guests with some really, really interesting moments in 2020 on the tightrope, didn't we?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I mean, Rhapsody herself and all of her intellectual and artistic power was really something. Noam Chomsky, living legend, 90 years young and still strong as ever. We have been blessed to have some towering people, some magnificent figures on this show.
Yeah. You make me think of Tracy Ellis Ross talking about the power of Black beauty and feeling free with oneself. And Dr. Fauci, who's everywhere, but we got to learn about his work during the AIDS crisis and how important that was. And, just so many interesting people sharing so many different facets of their lives. I mean, it was really, really interesting, for sure.
Oh, true. AOC.
Right.
Oh, that was something.
Yeah, that was
her father.
Yeah, that was really that was an amazing conversation. I mean, every conversation was truly amazing, honestly. I mean, there's so many interesting people doing such interesting work. So what we're going to do for our tightrope peeps is we're going to put together a compilation for 2020 to just show some of the powerful and insightful and reflective and sometimes funny moments that we had with our amazing community. We really are so grateful for everybody. And we just want to thank you all for being, interested, courageous, supportive, encouraging, questioning, challenging what we're trying to do here on the tightrope in 2020. And we look forward to a even better year in 2021. And we hope you'll stay with us. And we just want to wish you a fantastic holiday season. And we will definitely get back with you very soon. Take good care.
How does one intervene at this particular moment, being true to all of these different dimensions of yourself? Because the mainstream is going to try to reduce you down to one niche, one label, one category, one particular way of looking at it. How do you sustain that and still give the world the gifts that you were put here to give? I mean, it sounds abstract, but it's a very moral and spiritual question in a way. Yeah. And it's more than charisma. People talk about your charisma. Oh, Lord, the sister got charisma. But it's more than that. Oh, yes. It's a whole organic coming together in AOC at this particular historical moment.
Well, I think in this context, what I find to be the spiritual practice that I have been practicing the most, or perhaps discipline that I've been practicing the most ever since I even won my primary, is non-attachment. And that is I think it is the most important thing in my position, because politics, the intimidation, the pressure, the immense intimidation and pressure to conform is entirely based around your attachments to these things. If I can threaten what you are attached to, then if I can take away something that you are attached to, then I can make you do what I want you to do. And so what I have to practice every day is non-attachment to the things that we are naturally attached to. For example, attachment to my office. I cannot be attached to keeping my seat as a member of Congress if I'm going to do my job. Because my job is not to be the Congresswoman of New York's 14th district. I guess I should say that is my job. That is not my mission.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And my mission is to advance principles of a better world and to advance a better world. And that is my mission. And if I am overly attached to this seat, I cannot do my job. And so, the first thing I have to do is practice non-attachment to my seat. I made decisions in my first year in Congress, from the very first day, joining a sit-in at Nancy Pelosi's office.
I remember that.
I made decisions that I knew would result in a primary challenge against me, that I knew was inviting millions of dollars to be dumped against me in my election. And I had to practice non-attachment in saying, I do not need this. I cannot need this if I am going to advance a better world. I have to practice non-attachment to ego and to esteem. I cannot be attached to social acceptance in a small class of powerful and wealthy people. If I am attached to social acceptance in that class, which frankly are my colleagues in Congress, I will not be able to do my job. And that in particular was extremely painful because a lot of people see the outside. They'll see my Twitter feed, they will see my picture in the news. But my first year was very painful because I would walk into rooms and, it's your work, it's your job, right? If you work in a university or if you work in a restaurant or what have you, imagine going to work every day and your coworkers who you respect, you may not agree with them, but you respect them, turn their backs on you, 90% of them. Or they speak about you in bad ways, or they undermine you, or they send, or they speak about you anonymously to the press, saying terrible or just cruel things. And that was, that doesn't even have to do with ego or seat or station. It's just human beings are wired for community and acceptance. And it was very painful because once you are a member of Congress, physically, you're voting in Washington, D.C. 4 out of 7 days a week. And so I found myself going through this whiplash of going home to my community on the weekends and people saying, keep going, thank you, keep fighting. And then taking a train to Washington and people just being treated or feeling like I'm a bad person. It was very hard. And so you have to practice non-attachment to that as well. You have to practice non-attachment financially, right? Because as much as there's all of this fame and all of this stuff, even just legally, like I don't make any money on the side. So I'm a member of Congress. And so if you lose your job, you lose your income as well. And so
I think in your mother's church, I think it would be put in terms of being in the world, but not of it.
Exactly.
All of these penultimate things you got to wear like a loose garment, because what you are focused on is the needs and sufferings of everyday people, and find joy in serving them, whatever your job is, whatever your position is, whatever your station is.
You know, to think of that, of the community as helping illuminate everybody's vulnerability, right?
You know, Professor Rose, you nailed that. I think also it just, what you just said connected with something that Dr. Angela Davis had said recently in a video. I will paraphrase greatly because I don't remember it exactly, but that it's, you know, we already know, she said that transgender individuals, queer folks, but particularly transgender individuals, are showing us a way to have a better understanding about not only gender and sex and sexuality, but also who we are as humans. And that was extremely paraphrased. But I think that kind of, what you just said kind of resonates with me on that same level, is that, you know, people think of trans people and queer people and oftentimes people of color as like these other like renegades or people who are, you know, everything but just humans who have a different understanding maybe of the way that you, of different understanding of things other than the way that you may do it or that person may do it. But how we are all connected is so, I think it's just so crucial to see that no one wants to be put in a box. No one wants to be withheld. No one wants to be micromanaged or over, you know, regulated. And the only way to break free from like any type of imprisonment really is having a greater understanding of who we are, our bodies, ourselves, our minds, our spirituality, each other. And I think, and it's true that trans people and queer people and people in the queer community and every marginalized community has something to teach the rest of the world. Right. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, when you look at just the history of humankind, and in the end, it's really about how do we learn how to see things given our blind spots, and feel more deeply given our indifference, and act more courageously given our proclivity toward conformity. And so trans folk, y'all see things that, you know, we straight folk just don't see, because you're dealing with forms of marginality that you can see things through your lens as human beings, articulated, expressed, that folk don't see. Just like Black folk can see things a lot of white brothers and sisters can't see. And the question becomes, how do we lift those voices back to the anthem of Black folk now? When you say lift every voice, you didn't say just lift straight voices. You didn't say just lift Black bourgeois voices. You didn't say just lift Black voices in Connecticut as opposed to Mississippi. No. Lift all the voices, trans voices across the board. You see what I mean? That's the fundamental thing. Then my Bible tells me the least of these, the most vulnerable. Now, who are the most vulnerable? What you do unto them, you do unto me. That's what Jesus is talking about. Now, see, you know, most of the pastors ain't got that memo. Don't get me wrong. The churches ain't got that memo for the most part. But that deep love overcoming through overloving, that's what it's about. That's what your grandma understood. You see, that's what Tricia is asking her whole life. And in that way, you can't help but have a smile, even given all of the grimness and all of the ugliness in the world, you see.
There's so much hatred that we have taken in unconsciously without even knowing it, that we are still trying to unpack. And at the core of all of it is a sense and a desire to celebrate a sense of liberation for us, for each of us, as beauty, as women, as men, and wherever you are, a sense of freedom in how you inhabit your skin.
Right, for sure.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah.
This is deep stuff, though. I mean, if beauty itself is a fundamental human response to being terrorized and traumatized, that beauty itself then becomes not just a weapon, but it becomes a condition in which we live to be able to be creative human beings and agents responding to terror and trauma just long enough to be able to feel a sense of being at home and to spread it, to send it out the way Ashford and Simpson say. Ashford and Simpson say, just send it, just keep sending
it out
that hope and that love. But the beautiful thing about it is that it means that whiteness itself is not the point of reference. It may be a response to whiteness, but it's not the point of reference.
Yep.
It's from a tradition that itself has had to respond to terror and trauma. And then with all of that style, that's what all of that style in the hair, and it's the way you walk, the way you talk, it's your hair, it's your connection, it's your love, it's your grin, it's your touch, it's your smile, it's your hug. You see, that's a way of being, which is love-centered, which is Black to the core at its best. Now, we got Black thugs and gangsters too, but I mean, at its best in that way, you see.
I wrote down, I'm so big on taking notes, but I wrote a sense of home. And that is it, the sense of home in your own skin, especially, home in your own body when we know the violence and brutality that has been inflicted on our bodies and what that means. And as you were talking, Dr. West, I kept thinking of Thelma Golden of the Studio Museum of Harlem. She took me to Carrie James Marshall's show here in LA, and I got to walk it with her. And to walk through an art show with somebody who knows that much is just
Sister Thelma. We love Sister Thelma.
Oh my God! I mean,
this is run at the highest level.
She's incredible, and so I just was in awe. But she explained a story which I am so not going to do justice to, but has just stuck with me forever, which is that Carrie James Marshall, in the way that when you are taught color as an artist, they teach you to mix everything with white paint. That's how you create color. And so in all of the skin and color that he works with, he mixes with black paint. And it just gives me chills just thinking of just that gentle shift of context of, it's like the idea of Black futurism, that our identity doesn't have to be designed in relationship to trying to get out of the trauma and out of that supremacy and that all of that. But instead, it's like, if you were to imagine oneself, one's Blackness, one's beauty, one's sense of home from that space, what do you become? What liberation is available to you?
The critical difference between the parties, whatever you think about them, there actually is a chasm on two crucial, essential issues of survival. Are we going to be able to address the growing environmental catastrophe in time, or are we not? That's a question that has to be answered within a decade or two. The other issue, which is equally existential, is the threat of terminal nuclear war. It's higher now than it has been even during the Cold War, and increasing. I mean, to the extent that the doomsday clock last January, the analysts dropped minutes, moved to seconds. And since then, Trump has made it worse, dismantling the last remnants of the arms control regime, which set some constraints on the threat of total destruction, and moving to develop new, more threatening weapons in violation of past treaties, which essentially entices others to do the same. That means limiting the prospect of survival, the darkening the shadow that we've been living under for 75 years. No mention. Lots of talk about other things, but not the two questions that human beings now face for the first time in human history, the questions whether the human experiment will continue in the short term. We're not talking about millennia or centuries. We're talking about decades, and nobody's talking about it. It's a shocking comment on the whole social order. There's many other problems, urgent, significant ones, but if these aren't solved, everything else is moot.
Do you think the police can actually be transformed into a fair, anti-racist, safety presence in Black communities and poor communities? Do you think that's a possibility? I mean, I think I'm assuming we largely agree that that's not what they mostly are, right?
We agree that certainly that's not what they mostly are. And I'll say a couple things. You're dealing with a culture. And so when you train people and dress people for war, they go into a neighborhood to do battle. And so it should not be a mystery to us when these officers do what they do. Second, you're dealing with a culture. I get so annoyed when I hear some person of color, male or female, that becomes the next hashtag, and the first response from law enforcement is, we need more training. They are epitomizing the definition of Einstein's theory of insanity. There is more training. When I was an assistant chief, my officers were in 3 categories every single day, either on duty, at training, or on vacation. Training usually was the dominant slice of the pie in terms of percentages of their time. They're trained constantly. And quite frankly, going to implicit bias training, going to de-escalation training for most of these officers is checking the box. They have no interest in it. They're not going to change. They're in a warrior culture when they need to be in a guardian culture. You know, they're not joining these departments to serve. They're joining many of these departments for excitement. And that's the wrong reason to be there. So to answer your question, there's going to have to be some wholesale changes to happen to the culture for this to take place. And I think it starts with holding chiefs accountable. But more importantly, Professor Rose, chiefs are selected by councils and mayors. And oftentimes they select the person who takes the best interview instead of the best person to serve that community. And they all need to be held accountable.
No, I tell you, in typical fashion, Sister Tricia's already got this deep sea diving, because these are some fundamental questions, though, brother. But first, I just want to say that it's just good to see you, and as my alpha brother, 1906, though, brother, we go all the way back.
Thank you, sir. We certainly do.
Martin Luther King Jr., W.B. Du Bois, Donny Hathaway, Duke Ellington, Charles Wesley. I mean, there's some countries that don't have the high quality of men that the one fraternity of Black folk in America does in that fraternity. So it's a blessing to see you, because we've never really had a chance to meet before,
right,
and spend time together. So it's a blessing. But let me raise this question. Ras Baraka, the visionary mayor of Newark, has said that there's a sense in which police are very much like American citizens across the board. They just have state-sponsored guns. So there's a sense in which we can't really expect more of them in terms of how they come to terms with racism or sexism or whatever, than we do with American citizens as a whole. Now, of course, we want to hold all of us accountable and hold them accountable too. But the issue is this larger cultural and societal backdrop from whence our police come. Now, what do you say to young brothers and sisters who would argue that maybe America just doesn't have the capacity to treat the masses of poor Black people with decency and dignity? It's not just the police that don't do it, but it's other institutions as well. What kind of message, both in your example as well as in words, do you say to them who have that kind of fundamental question?
That's a very, very good question, obviously. And I offer this for all those institutions that reinforce and sustain the oppressive practices that we have to endure. I say for those progressive minds that are out there in those disciplines, become part of those institutions. When I talk about policing specifically, I say, you know, if I had a young progressive like you in uniform, we wouldn't have some of these things happening. If I had a young progressive like you in the banking industry, we wouldn't have to look at unfair lending practices. And so as diverse as we are in professions as a people, those young progressives that are coming up behind us now need to be part of these institutions to make a change. Again, I go back to my dad. We can't change these institutions from the outside. With all due respect to protest and unrest and civil disobedience, at the end of the day, the infrastructure has to change. And the only way that changes is if we become part of it and make it move.
So I also wanted to be a midwife. So I said to myself, look, I want to be a midwife or an actor. Which choice am I going to make? You know, being an actor, you could fail. It's very unlikely you'll be successful. It's very hard to make a living. I saw my dad struggle to raise us. But I said, look, more than being an actor or being a midwife, I want to be a brave person. So I'm going to commit between 18 and 19 to being brave. That's my job. So the scarier thing is to try to be an actor. So I'm going to commit to failing every day for a year towards being an actor. So I went on audition, or I'd dissect a movie, or I'd take an acting class every day. I'd get terrible feedback from auditions sometimes. And I'd say, you know what? I'm such a badass. I'm going to show up at the next audition and still audition. I'm not going to let it shut me down, because my real job is to be brave.
Wow.
And through that, I ended up getting a job. Had I not given myself the freedom to fail, I would never have succeeded.
Wow.
That is a powerful
Isn't
story.
it?
It's a powerful way of looking at the world. I mean, where did that worldview come from? I mean, America makes a fetish out of success. We know Tennessee Williams' great essay, The Catastrophe of Success. But America fetishizes success as if failing somehow pushes you out. And of course, we got the neo-fascist gangster in the White House. The very talk about failure makes him shudder. You know, like
yes,
Faust in the realm of the mothers in Goethe's classic. Where'd you get this view of the centrality of courage and bravery, Dosas?
I think my parents had it, honestly. I mean, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, and it was 3rd stage. And she did a lot of research. She was a brilliant woman. You would have loved her. Great poet.
Yes.
Amazing woman. And so she ended up doing alternative methods. But watching my mom, because she said, look, there's already a shadow on my lung. I'm really early 4th stage. But talk about bravery. I mean, watching someone battle that in front of you. She was such a badass when we were little kids. There's a story that when they were waiting for the bus, her and my sister. And when the bus came, they wouldn't stop to let this handicapped person on. So my mom just laid down in front of the wheels of the bus until they stopped and let them on the bus. So she was really a powerful woman.
She was special.
Wow, that's incredible.
No, we understand where you come from.
Oh yeah.
I have a little tiny bit of her power, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
But it's not only the courage to fail, but it's also not to internalize that rejection as having anything to do with you.
Exactly.
Right?
You're
So
right.
say more.
Because I mean, in acting, it's all about rejection. You're at the will of all these parties. Sometimes you're in a room with 30 producers and a network and all these people, and it can just destroy you because you're also an artist. But it's not true. I mean, luckily, because my dad was an actor, he said, sweetie, all you do is you do your research beforehand, you prepare yourself, you go in the room, you have fun, you do the best job you can, you explore, and then you leave it there and it's out of your hands. And it's really not your business what they think of you.
Yeah. But I mean, it's still hard, it's hard because, it's human nature. We want affirmation. That's, we don't want to go and be rejected, but it's very important lesson. And to do it between 18 and 19 is so perfect before before there's so much to worry about, right? When you're early enough in your development to solidify that kind of thinking and that approach. I mean, that's amazing. And I mean, I'm gonna take this. I might bring this to my own career at this point and give myself a whole year of failure, planned failure. You know what I mean? Because basically anything that happens that's not a horrible failure is like gravy. It's like, hey,
actually every failure is a success.
Oh, that's even more intense. You see, I still haven't let go of the success model because I'm like, well, failures are fine, but maybe there'll be a little tiny bit of success.
Well, it is.
Okay,
because
tell me what you mean.
the payoff you get when you get a failure. I mean, I'm going to tell you, I'd go on an audition. I made a choice. It was such a boring part. Okay. It was like a nothing part of the secretary, like, you know, Mr. Weaver, you have a call on line 3. It was like nothing. So I decided just to play her like a total ditz. Like during the audition, I was like dropping papers and like forgetting things. It's kind of spacing out. And anyway, I left. My agent got a call from the casting director. What the hell was wrong with her? She was horrible. You know, that was the worst, the worst audition I ever had. I said, call them back and tell them that was my acting choice. That's not who I am. But as a woman, you assume that's who I am. This is a boring ass part. And this was my choice I decided to make it more interesting for me. You don't have to like it, it's fine. But I was really proud of myself for taking a chance and making a choice. And once I got that, you know, negative response, instead of shutting down, when I got my next audition, I was like, the prize that I get is totally committing myself again. Okay, years ago, sometimes in acting, I'll do different things. Like I have these medicine cards, which are different Native American animals, and I might pull some on a project. And I was doing this, we were building toilets in Haiti, compost toilets. And I pulled the snake card. And snake medicine is people who can ingest poison from a snake, and they ingest it and they keep getting bit and they get stronger and stronger and they build up an immunity to poison, which makes them super strong. So that's kind of how I looked at failure. Actually, every failure that came to me, I took it and I put it in me and I transformed it into medicine. And I said, that's great. I will take that failure, and instead of it being my kryptonite, it's going to nourish me. Mm-hmm. And it's going to nourish my strength to push through.
Mm. Wow. Wow.
That's some powerful wisdom.
Yeah, that really is. We're gonna have to keep that. We're gonna keep that on the tightrope. I'm gonna put that in my little pocket.
I'm trying to think through some of my failures. If I could transmute them and transform them into some medicine.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't that be? I'd be more powerful than ever.
I want to see as a Black man. I want to experience. I want to always be a 3-dimensional character. I actually want to not always be supporting someone else's story and be leading the way. But you're also looking at the crumb trail that you've had to follow to get to that point.
Exactly.
And I didn't walk out of school and anybody hand me jobs like that, you know? And so I'm like strategically putting together how to empower myself where I can make choices that I want to make.
You're stitching breadcrumbs together.
Yeah. So I'm like, I don't know, nobody else has offered me anything that was comparable or even close that wasn't like still 7th on the call sheet or what have you. So, you know, I'm doing what I can do, you know. And
right.
People have
but you've been true to yourself. You're true to your calling and vocation. You're allowing God to use you. And it may just reach the point, my brother, just like Denzel, where you have to direct yourself.
Yes.
Produce yourself.
Yes.
End up writing some of your own narratives with you.
Yes.
As the lead. You know what I mean?
Yes. We work.
You don't know what the Lord has in store for a brother like you, given your genius and talent, man. You just don't know.
That's right. That's right. And actually, you know, also, I mean, just to focus on a lead of some sorts, which I think is very important. Remember, we started out talking about being able to imagine yourself in a new place. and how important a science fiction is becoming for young people. And I mean,
Absolutely.
Black Panther was
Absolutely.
just a huge breakthrough, and now you're going to play the next Blade, which was really the first experience we had with that. And can you talk a bit about why you wanted to play that role and what you think about it? Because I think these are not just fanciful stories; they're really about how you imagine yourself out of the boxes that we're placed in. So to me, it's actually very important and creative. Tell us a little bit about that role and how it fits into what Cornel's saying about imagining, writing yourself in a sense.
So I did this Marvel show for Netflix called Luke Cage, right?
Yes, I know. I watched every episode.
Oh, thank you. And
yes,
so
I know you well.
So in doing that show, the day it premiered, I had turned to my agent and I had said, "What are they doing with Blade?" Because I kept hearing that they were trying to find a way to remake it and put it back together, and it was exciting for me to get to be in that Marvel space and TV. But for me, my goal had always been film, and so to get to, but also being able to participate in television in very specific ways that had real meaning. But my larger goal was to be able to really navigate between film and television. And so I turned to my agent and I said, what are they doing with Blade? And he goes, "I'll check on it." And so there was this long process of them speaking about, at least in the television division, really wanted to make it a TV show again, but not necessarily trying to acquire the rights still, and some things kind of going on. So it took a couple of years, but it was really my participation in Luke Cage that sparked the idea, married with being so inspired by Wesley Snipes' work and what he had done and how much had changed since his iteration of Blade, and how that had really sort of like ushered in this era of like this Marvel and DC sort of like comic book stuff. And so I just wanted to be considered for it because I had definitely a connection, at least in my mind, to Wesley Snipes, going way back to high school when people used to joke and say we looked alike and all this stuff. And so he was someone who sometimes people try to throw a little dig on you. They call me his character name. They call me Shadow from Mo Better Blues or whatever, right? Trying to crack. So I'd had this relationship with Wesley, but it also turned really super positive because that was meant as a dig. But then when the sisters was like, that's a win. It also worked for me in that way as well, So my point is, Wesley was someone who I recognized, and he had an impact on my confidence and in just me sort of just kind of like just standing in my own truth and on strength in a certain way. And so I'd always kind of followed his choices and really was inspired by his work and so many others, but Wesley in particular. And so I just brought it up as someone who I really wanted to take on that role and tackle that.
I think the best habit for improving my life was figuring out how to keep the rage that white supremacy produces at bay. Figuring out how to keep it at enough distance that it doesn't circulate in my body, literally. That's not a habit per se, but that's a disposition that allows my habits to thrive. Because, the older I get, the less explicitly angry I look, but the more actually pissed off and totally angry I am. I might look a little less mad than I looked at 25, but I'm twice as pissed off. And you know what they say about older Black women? The reason people don't mess with them is because they got no filter.
That's what I was about to say.
They got no filter. I'm getting close enough to 60 where you might not have to have me on a show, Corn, anymore, because I'm about to say some foolery. Because, it's like we don't care. We're not looking for dudes. We're not looking for accolades. We ain't putting on no bikinis anymore. So guess what? We about to tell you the doggone truth. So that's the real.
I love it. I'm real. No, I just don't think I'm in a situation or condition where I could ever give advice because my life is always a mess. It's always so much in the funk that I'm just trying to keep stroking, keep moving, and keep on pushing. But you say, okay, you got to keep your distance from the rat race because the winner of a rat race is still a rat. You got to love pace, and you try to love your way through the darkness. But even as you try to love, you're always failing. You're always collapsing and trying to bounce back. So I think for me, it's just a matter of just trying to cultivate at the highest level the capacity to listen, the capacity to serve, and the capacity to find joy in fighting for freedom.
That's what we got. We got a lot of work in front of us. But with you, Rhapsody, I have to say I feel much more sense of possibility. I've written a lot on hip hop over many, many years, and I've always celebrated what's amazing about it. But I've also been very harsh about what I think it has failed Black people in regard to. And I think if you love something enough, you have to be willing to say that. And you have to be willing to say that it's not just about do whatever the heck you want to do for money. And that there's people's lives at stake without being, heavy-handed, but also to be unyielding about that, because nobody's telling young Black people that this is brainwashing. It is really intended to really destroy our country and destroy our relationship to a political legacy. And nothing is more for doing that than the funk. If you can manipulate the funk into telling the wrong story, you can move much faster through a generation than any other way. And so we really have to undo that as much as we can. And with you, I feel like you're part. I don't put all that pressure on you, but you're part of that real possibility that we're going to break that chain. Right.
That's true.
And I feel thrilled about that. And we're so happy to have you here with us. Is there something you want to say that we didn't ask you? I had my own soapbox today. I'm sorry about that. It happens with hip hop every so often.
Oh, no apologies. I like when you go on your soapbox. It's truth, and people need to hear it, whether it feels good to hear or not. It's truth, and you always have to seek truth and honesty. And you're right. We haven't done the best job of protecting our culture that is hip hop, and we give it away too easy, and they've used that against us. I've heard about plans to take control of our culture, and they've done it by taking control of the radio and the mediums, and allowing us to give our art away and our ownership away and our voice away and our creativity away. And we have to find a way to get that back, because it is sonic warfare at the end of the day, and it puts us against our own kind in that way. But I see the light, I feel a change coming, and I'm inspired, and I'm happy to be, one of the leaders in it.
We need to realize that we don't really appreciate the intelligence in Black people. We deny it, and we try not to let it be seen. We try to deny it. We try to cover it up. We do social constructs, and we use 5 and 6 syllable words to describe things like white fragility.
But Sister Jane, but when you listen to the we, when you say we, you're not really talking about me, because I never assumed Black people were not.
I didn't say you. I said we.
The we. But the we,
deliberately.
but even the we that you use happens to be reinscribed back into the Black and white, because for the history of the we, the white supremacy is so vicious that even when we're trying to eliminate the category, we still have to use a we, because Black people have had such a long history of reaching the same conclusion you have in terms of our humanity.
Right. It is.
But on the white side of town, 65% of white brothers and sisters voted for who? Trump. 52% of white sisters voted for who? Trump. Which means that we has got a hell of a lot of problems. 98% of Black folk are voting against Trump, which means they've reached very different conclusions, even though the categories of white and Black are constructs. but they have this historical resonance given the viciousness of white supremacy being historically enacted. And that's why the issues that you're raising are crucial, fundamental, and has a spiritual and moral content to it. But it's a challenge because we have to move very close, very cautiously, because we're in a paradox.
Who has to move very cautiously? I don't have to move very cautiously. Wait a minute.
I was just telling you have to move cautiously because when you talk about we, you're not talking about me.
Absolutely. When I talk about we, I'm talking about what we palefaces have done.
Right.
We palefaces have been running the show, and we're running it badly, and we're running it right down the tubes. I'm not talking about we, the collective, because we, the collective, didn't have the power, wouldn't have the power to change this situation unless a bunch of those of us who are so-called white people join the group and say, no, we've had enough.
But there was a particular moment where the narrator was talking about a very significant turning point during the HIV era, before a lot was known and when everyone was extremely both afraid and often deeply violently mistreating the gay community. You specifically mentioned that you were disturbed by the government showing so little concern for the gay community, but also what you learned at that moment that changed you. Can you give us a little bit more than that? We want to sneak listen to, to what actually happened there, and how might that moment have impacted the way you're approaching COVID now, or human nature, or approaching governments now?
What it was, Tricia, it was important. It was clearly the mostly the gay community back then had such important good points of truth that they were not being listened to, and the government, scientists and regulators and officials were essentially dictating how you approach an outbreak that involved them, and they wanted to be part of the discussion. They wanted to be at the table, and no one listened to them. So they became very iconoclastic. They became very provocative, very theatrical, and it had the effect of they wanted to gain attention, but what it did is got everybody to pull back from them because they became afraid. That's not the way the very, what's the right word back then, buttoned down community of scientists and regulators acted. So what I did was, and this may be to something that Dr. West mentioned, whether it was something that was part of my training from my family, from my Jesuit training of service to others, I became very empathetic with them and said, rather, even when they were attacking me, I mean, they were really attacking me, writing articles. One of the great iconic activists of all time, Larry Kramer, my dear friend who recently passed away, was writing articles calling me a murderer, calling me an incompetent idiot because I was not listening to them. So what I said, instead of getting angry with them, I said, let me put the theater aside. Let me put the provocative things aside and listen to what they were saying. Mm-hmm. And when I listened to what they were saying, it made perfect sense. And I felt that if I were in their shoes, I would be doing exactly the same thing as they were doing. So I did something that turned everything around. Instead of running away from them, I invited them into my metaphoric tent, and I said, let's sit down and talk about it. And that began a dialogue that to this day has been very, very productive, because what they contributed to the effort, including the scientific effort, was extraordinary. They brought things up to me that I became even ashamed of being a part of it, when the rigidity of the process would prevent you from getting on a drug because the protocol said you couldn't be on a drug, even though being on that drug would not damage any other knowledge that you would have. It would have to be done in a pristine, perfect way. So I turned myself around and I became part of the activist group. And to me, that was one of the best things I've ever done.
Oh, indeed. I'm just building on Sister Tricia's point, though. You know, it's just so wonderful to see somebody who is such a unique combination of the sharpness of a scientific mind and the goldenness of a decent heart. Because science tends to be associated too much with arrogance and condescension and a certain kind of elitism of a pejorative sort, of looking down on the unscientific. And those with a decency of heart can also be anti-scientific and be suspicious of any claims having to do with nature of reality that seem to be painful and problematic. And you're able to bring those together at this unprecedented moment in the history of the country, where the pervasive spiritual decay and moral decline and the greed and the avarice and the hatred and the contempt, all of that happening at the same time.
Most of our school systems don't have in their curriculums the full truth about American past and present and future, let alone the full truth of the world's past and present and future. We have very narrow frameworks to understand the United States. Don't want to tell the truth about the slavery, don't want to tell the truth about the workers' movement, don't really want to tell the truth about women's subordination and the Mexican War and how California was once Mexico and became part of the United States and so forth. You know, these are painful truths that's oftentimes are just too much for the narrowness of the public school system. So we just have to have teachers who care enough about students that they care about the truth and knowledge and can give them and see the best of America and the worst. Anytime you see the worst of America, there's been Americans who have fought that worst. That's the best of America, you see. And so we need a broader framework to understand the truth about America, knowledge about the American past, how it relates to the present. And this is true, you know, at Brown University, it's true at Harvard, just as it is in public schools. But what would be your take, my dear sister?
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, you know, the thing that really moved me about what you started with was, you know, that isn't about the subject. This is how I translated what you said. It's not about science or about philosophy or about English or about novels. It's about our character. And the moment you start with that, right? Are we going to be about courage? Are we going to be about truth telling? Are we going to be about compassion, and so on and so forth? Now we pick the subjects after that, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's not about the content. But we're so technocratic on education right now. It's all about, you know, what's my goal? How can I use this information to gain a leverage point one way or another? So that's one main thing. But I think, you know, the denial of the flaws of the development of this nation, the colonial history, the history of enslavement, the stealing of the entire nation, it's the continent, the Northern American continent, from the indigenous people, all of this, the fact that we can't even address it in any reasonable way has made most citizens more brittle. And the more brittle they are, the more they bristle and fight against hearing that which makes them uncomfortable. But if we could figure out how to listen to the reality of the situation and believe, because of the ethical decisions you've laid out, Cornel, believe that the next step is a process of reconciliation and reflection and transformation, and to see that on the other side is the loss of that brittle kind of defensiveness and that shocking denial of, how am I going to survive now that I know I come from a colonial people? Oh my God, you know, it's like, well, okay, you've been surviving okay without knowing. So, you know, let's work on what assets are going to be accrued by knowing. So to me, it's about the psyche that has been destroyed in relationship to this. It's made people unable to be the warriors for justice that they could be. You know, you, Cornel, and I teach, you know, African American studies, among many other things. But I find, and I don't know if this is true for you, but that when people know, who haven't heard and who haven't been paying attention, of course there's shock and outrage and a stage of grief, because it's horrible news, a lot of it. But once people feel like they can be aware and have a certain kind of, I don't quite want to say mastery, but knowledge and empowerment by knowing, then they move to other stages of relationship to the material, right? And that is what we really need, right, to solve this situation. I have one last thought about this, and that is, I think we have the kind of technology now where we can get around this problem. right? If we take the curriculum basically to the virtual streets, and that's some of what we're doing here on the Tightrope, right? Creating, content that people will challenge these brittle kinds of consciousnesses and encourage people to keep forging forth to say, look, this knowledge does not break you. It empowers you to do the right thing, to have the courage to do the right thing. And I think we just have to use more of our resources in front of us as much as we can to really dispel the kinds of consciousnesses that this educational system produces.
Absolutely. And this is another reason why, people talk oftentimes about speaking truth to power.
Mm-hmm.
And that's badly needed. But we also need to teach the truth to the relatively powerless.
Mm-hmm.
Because poor and working people, wherever they are, they also need to know the truth about themselves and ways in which they can be empowered. But the truth about themselves, about what they're up against.
So I mean, it's been such a blessing to have you on the Tightrope.
It's
We're just
magnificent.
so happy to have you and to hear your thinking.
It's an honor. It's an honor. I appreciate what y'all are doing. We need more of this. And whenever I'm around Dr. West, it's like, I get nervous. He's like the overseer. He's like the uncle that comes over, the no nonsense uncle that, make sure that you on your job. And if you ain't,
who are you telling?
You know what I mean? I respect you so much, man. You know what I mean? I just, it's an honor to be, on this platform, man. Keep doing your thing. We love you. We need you. And, I appreciate what y'all's doing, man. Tricia, I need your books.
I'll send them to you. No doubt about it. They'll be in the mail today.
Please.
No, brother, we love you, we respect you, and we thank you for enriching our lives, man.
Thank you,
absolutely.
Thank you.
I'm telling you,
you're one of the main reasons I decided to write about hip hop in the
you
first
just
place.
don't know. You enrich our lives, man. Keep us going.